Hi everyone. So I've mentioned in some previous videos about having a little bit of writer's block and having some struggles with trying to get words to do what I want them to do. And I thought I'd have a bit of a chat about that today. I have tried this video before and the sound ended up disappearing. So I'm hoping that is fine and that this sound setup that I've got is okay and sufficient to do what I need it to do. So yeah, I'm hoping that it all works out because this is probably going to be a long video. It may even be one I break down into a few different parts. But mainly I just wanted to talk about some of the struggles I've had with being creative lately. Some of you may relate to similar ones. Some of you may have some suggestions that you've done to overcome some of these things. I'm going to talk about some of the plans that I have to try and overcome them. But yeah, otherwise it's just going to be a bit of a chat about why sometimes it can be a struggle to write. So in terms of my writing, I haven't really written solidly for about 2 years now, and I know that's pretty terrible. I used to write easily 1,000 to 5,000 words a day. I was working full-time at the time and I'd only have like an hour and a half to write, and I would, maybe sometimes it was a bit more than that, but you know, I would do whatever I could within that time and it felt like I was getting progress every day. And I wrote books very, very quickly because of that. Not as quick as some, but definitely quick enough to have sort of a relatively fast production schedule and release schedule. And even by the time you factor in the editing and all the other things that come into books, I still had an average of about 1,000 words a day. So in a year, 365,000 words, which, if, you know, on an average book, that's probably about 4 books a year, which, like I said, not the fastest, but definitely not the slowest either. But it's been a long time since I've had anything like that production schedule. I think part of it was emotional burnout to a degree, because I wrote Phoebe's books, and if you've read those books you know that they're pretty emotionally heavy books, especially the last few ones, and that was exhausting. I backed that straight up with writing the rest of A Life Lived in Amber. That was something that I wrote a long time ago as a short story for fan fiction, and I fleshed it out, made the characters more real, but it was also quite an emotionally heavy book, and it was one that by the time I got towards the end, I didn't like the characters. They weren't doing things I agreed with, and so I didn't have the passion for the book that I probably should have had before I released it. But I kind of also thought that it was a story I wanted to get out into the world, even if I didn't particularly like the characters. It's pretty darn hard to sell a book you don't like with characters you don't like, especially when you struggle to sell the books that you love. But, you know, again, I did believe in the story, even if I didn't particularly like the characters or the events that happened. So I think those quite emotionally heavy, emotionally taxing books kind of took a little bit out of me. And I tried to do some fun, shorter novellas instead, on the Fleur Smith side, so the paranormal side. And I did have fun writing those, and I was trying to get some of those done and link them up and everything. But again, I didn't have the passion that I needed to have to put the effort in to do the sales. Like, I can muster up all the passion in the world for the writing and for the characters and even for the editing. Like, I actually quite enjoy the editing process because I feel like my words get better and better each time, but I just had lost something, and I'll go into a little bit more detail shortly about part of what I think that it was that I lost. Yeah, that sort of made it really hard, and not having the passion and not having the intense drive to sell the books, even though that's the one thing that you're told is the most important thing in the world, kind of makes you feel like a bit of a failure and a bit of a fraud. I know that no one else is going to sell my books for me. Of course they're not. Why would they? They've got their own books to sell, or they're readers that have 1,000 other authors that they love just as much or more than they love my books, and that's completely fine, and I totally understand that. And I know that the ultimate responsibility for any sales or any interest or anything like that falls on me, and that's terrifying for me. And this leads into my second point. My second point is I have a tremendous fear of failure, but bigger than that is a fear of success. And the fear of success comes in really weird kind of self-sabotaging moments. So I might be going along fine and I got a BookBub for one of my books. And if you don't know the author industry, basically BookBub is quite a big deal because you can sell quite a lot. And for the right people, if you do the right steps, it can actually launch your career into the next sort of step. You can go from being, 2 or 3 figure income a month to being 4 or 5 quite easily if you do it right. And I got one of those and I was trying to do it right. And then I saw the sales coming in and then I backed away and I got scared and I didn't do the things that I needed to do to continue to follow up on that slight level of success. So that kind of, I don't know how to get over that aspect of my personality, because the reason that I have a fear of success is I always worry that I'm never going to be better than I was yesterday. People talk about not making it a race with other people and making it a race with yourself. And I completely understand that and I completely agree with it. But sometimes your past self does things better than your current one. You might have been in a better headspace or a different headspace or had some creative stroke of genius, and trying to capture that again and again and again is scary. And you always think that your next book should be better than the last, but is it being worse? And it becomes this self-fulfilling prophecy that because you're so scared that it's going to be worse than your last book, it is a little bit less than the last one, or at least it is in your mind. Whether it is or not, I don't know. That's kind of subjective, I guess, as to each individual person, because everyone has their own tastes on things. So what happened around that time, there was a few other bits and pieces, and again I will go into that. I just sort of want to leave that as its own self-captured thing. But some things happened and I closed down my street team, which is basically like a Facebook group where you can talk about your books and everything like that. I had quite a few really good friends in there. I'm still friends with a lot of them on Facebook, and I still see them and smile when I see their names because they mean a lot to me still, even if they don't know that. And I closed down pretty much everything. I even took my author page offline for a little while on Facebook. I did end up putting that back on just because I thought I should. But I've never had the same sort of level of passion for it since then. And that became a bit of a struggle too, because obviously without the street team, without that communication, the few sales that I did have and the little bit of interest that I could garner was gone completely. The things you need to do to be successful, quick reviews on release day buzz, cover releases, and sort of all those things that everyone tells you are the way to be successful, all of that was gone because I didn't have the drive to do them myself. I didn't have the drive to chase down people and ask them to do it for me, because why should they do something that I couldn't be bothered doing myself? They're not the ones who are having any interest in it. I'm the one who makes the financial benefits out of it, even if I usually lose money more than I make benefits. But it just became really, really hard for me. And I guess maybe I need to talk about that now, because it's going to keep coming up, because there was an event that happened that really did put me on the back foot, on top of all the fear of success, on top of everything else. A couple of years ago in the romance community, I guess I kind of had my heart broken by a lot of people that I thought were really good friends of mine. And that did kind of shatter a lot of the confidence I had in my words and in what I was doing. And it made me question why I wanted what I wanted and whether I wanted what I wanted. So basically what happened was there was a book that was released that was like marketed as ooh, scary and taboo, and you can't read it because it's just too naughty to be read and blah blah blah. And eventually the details got around, because obviously the author was leaning very heavily on this taboo marketing, so to try and get some talking out of it. And it was a book that had incest that people claimed wasn't really incest, because he wasn't related to his adopted daughter that he had raised since she was a child, and they were having sex and having this relationship when she was a young adult, older teen. And people were sort of saying about how, oh, it makes you believe that it's wrong, but it's not wrong because there's no incest, because she wasn't actually related to him. But he still raised her. She's still his daughter. There's still grooming involved. And I didn't necessarily agree with the book. I don't think that that's something that should be done. Like, children and young teenagers and even slightly older teenagers who are children of people, of the protagonists, I don't believe that they should be included as a romance. But that's my personal opinion. That's fine if you don't agree with that. If you believe that it's just fiction and stuff like that, that's fine. But what really broke me and what really kind of killed the passion to a large degree was the number of people who were trying to silence people who are victims of sexual assault. People who are victims of very similar situations where their parents or their uncles or, you know, someone else who was in a leadership role in their family did that sort of thing to them. And people were complaining that this book was bringing up those feelings. And rather than saying, I understand that, I didn't realize that that would hurt in that way. I enjoyed the book, but I can understand why it would hurt you. People were saying, shut up, it's just fiction. And talking over the victims and telling the victims and the survivors to shut up and sit down and stop complaining. And I didn't like the discourse in it. It wasn't so much the book, even though I think that the book is vile and I don't agree with it being sold as a romance. It's the community that turned on itself and shouted down victims of sexual assault and survivors of sexual assault and the people in our community who needed the care and the support at that time, who needed the understanding at that point in time. And people were telling them to shut up. It's just fiction. Don't worry about it. It doesn't affect your life. And it just left me feeling really sick and betrayed. I had people who were friends that I'd considered really good friends from the moment I got into writing, taking part in this and shitting on the victims. And I just couldn't do it. It broke me in a lot of ways. And I started wondering what the point of doing the writing was, if I was in any way fueling this sort of hatred in the community, this sort of victim blaming. And that was the other problem, is people were sort of saying, like, even the ones who weren't taking the it's just fiction, shut up route, were sort of saying, well, she wanted it. She was the instigator. She was the one who was asking for it. And if you've ever known, spoken to, or been a victim of sexual assault, you know that that is the sort of thing that your perpetrator says to you to try and get you to shut up, to take the blame on yourself. There are even judges who have said that someone was particularly sexual for a 12-year-old or a 13-year-old, and that excused the actions of an adult male. It just really upset me that people could be so callous and could use words that perpetrators have used against survivors for the longest time and take them and use them as justification for why it was okay to have that book as this, held up as this perfect example of incestuous romance, and that this was a romantic hero that we should look forward to, like we should look up to. And that was the bit that bothered me the most. It's not that it was written, it's not that it exists, although personally I don't think that there should be any sort of romance or erotica that involves children. I think children should be off limits, full stop, end of story, off limits. That's not to say that I don't think that child sex abuse and similar things have a place in the world, in stories. Of course they do, but they should be about holding up the survivor and about celebrating overcoming adversity, and they should be about, you know, the impacts that it can have on someone's life. They shouldn't be celebrated as romantic heroes. They shouldn't be celebrated as romantic stories that we should look up to and that we should aspire to. And I think that there's a big difference. And I think if you can't tell the difference between those two things, I worry about, I guess, what you allow in your life and what, I don't know, it's hard to express it without coming off judgmental. And I don't mean to sound judgmental. I usually wouldn't kink shame. I don't necessarily read rape as romance books in general, but I understand that it's part of like the consensual non-consent genre that some people do enjoy, and that is their kink, and that's fine. I've got no problems with erotica that relies on those sorts of tropes if that's someone's yum. I'm not here to yuck on someone else's yum, as people say. And that's fine. But I think as soon as you're involving children, it crosses a line. Same as involving animals or necrophilia. It's just crossing a line that shouldn't be crossed, specifically in romance. It shouldn't be celebrated. It shouldn't be held up. These men that are abusers should not be celebrated as these heroes in romantic fiction. It shouldn't happen. And the fact that so many people were jumping to the defense of it and silencing actual victims who had been hurt by this sort of situation, actual survivors who had gone through it and processed their feelings, but were now having all of those feelings thrown back at them, it just hurt. It's as simple as that. And it's been hard to come back from that, because you start to wonder, in what small way am I contributing to this sort of situation where people think that that's okay, where fiction is fiction and it doesn't matter what happens. And I guess that leads on to the next point that I have. I have wondered whether the tropes in my stories are dangerous or good or bad, or whether I should be doing something different. It made me question some of the things that happen in my stories. Like in Declan's stories, it's very important to me that that story was about his redemption, and not his redemption because of a woman, but his redemption because he decided he wanted to be worthy of having the life that he wanted. And there's even a part where she tells him that she can't be the reason he gets better. She can't be the reason he holds himself together. And I think that that's an important story to tell. There are points where he is technically a victim of rape, where he gets abusive towards a woman who was his rapist, but that's not addressed as such in the book. And I don't mean to sound that it's dismissed completely. It's sort of told through flashbacks and stuff, but he doesn't process that as a rape victim, because in his mind, I don't think he would have ever seen it as that, although that is what happened technically. And yeah, just those little bits and pieces, I start to wonder, what am I putting into the world that might not be making it a better place? And I don't mean to do anything to hurt people or to harm or to do anything that causes any actual hurt, but part of me does wonder, am I feeding into the misogyny? Am I feeding into this toxic masculinity? I've always said that my boys are beta boys rather than alpha males, because the alpha hole trope just drives me up the wall personally. And they are, but that doesn't mean that they don't do things that are entirely questionable, that would be major, major red flags if they were real people. In my Angels and Cupids books, there's a scene where he's watching her as she sleeps. There's another scene where he's watching her as she has sex with someone else. And they're not malicious. He's not doing it in a way that I think a stalker would do it. But that doesn't mean it's not stalker behavior. That doesn't mean that there's not red flags there. And I guess there's just that part of my head that's sort of overthinking those sorts of things every time I start to write a story. What am I putting out into the world? Am I putting out the right sort of story? And I know some authors don't give a crap. They will write whatever and they don't care. And that's fine. That's completely their prerogative and more power to them. But I just have had my eyes opened to a few of these things and how they can hurt and how they can break people and break their spirit a little bit. And I don't want to contribute to that. I don't want to be the reason that someone has traumatic flashbacks. I'm happy to make people cry. I'll make people cry all day long. I love when people cry at my stories, because it tells me that they are having an emotional investment in the characters, and that's fantastic. I even love it when people hate my characters, because that tells me there's an emotional attachment. But I don't want people to have their most traumatic memories brought back for them because of my characters. I don't want to be feeding into a world where rape victims are silenced, where victims of child sexual assault are silenced, because it's just fiction. Honestly, I think that there's a way you can have both conversations. I think you can talk about how a book is problematic, or the relationship in a book is problematic, without shitting on the author and without saying that the author is a bad person. The problem is, as an author myself, I'm not allowed to say those things without being silenced and without being criticized for being critical of other authors. And that sucks. It's wrong. I shouldn't have to keep my mouth shut if I think that 50 Shades of Grey perpetrates abuse. And I'm not talking about the BDSM. Happy with the BDSM. There's 1,000 BDSM books on the market that I have no problem with at all, because I know that that is part of an actual lifestyle. But the stalking is not appropriate behavior. And I'm not saying that they're bad books, or that you shouldn't enjoy them as books, or you shouldn't enjoy them as romance. I'm saying that we should be able to have the conversation to say, yes, you enjoyed the books, but please recognize that these aspects of the relationship are harmful. Please talk about how these aspects of the relationship are harmful. Let's have that discussion so that our young women aren't going out and reading these books and thinking that that's what they should be looking for in men. And our young men aren't going out and hearing about these books and going, well, that's what women want. There are too many guys out there already who think that women want domineering, terrible people who will shit all over their desires, because that's what we tell them in common media that they want. And I think we need to open up that discussion. And I think as authors, we have a responsibility to open up that discussion. And people are going to, even on this video, if I put it on Facebook, I guarantee people are going to comment things like, it's just fiction, you need to get over it. It's just fiction, it doesn't matter, it's just fiction. You know, people understand that it's not real. It's for people who are older than that anyway, so they understand what is red flags and what's not. But that's assuming quite a lot. A lot of people don't have healthy relationships that they can look up to determine what is right and what is wrong, what's a red flag and what's not. And so they turn to fiction. They turn to movies and books and songs to learn about how relationships work. And if we're only feeding them negative examples without context about why that is a particular problem, I just think we're creating problems in society that we don't need to be. And that's something that has been weighing heavily on me, that, you know, I can't criticize anything or discuss why relationships are problematic because I get told to shut up, you're an author, just support other authors. And like I said, I mentioned 50 Shades. I'm not shitting on E.L. James at all. I think what she's done for the romance community is fantastic. She's opened the door for so many self-publishers, and I think that's fantastic. All power to her for having the success that she's got. I think that's fantastic. But that doesn't mean that her books, not even the books themselves, but the portrayal of relationships in the books, shouldn't be criticized. That doesn't mean that we shouldn't have critical discussions about them. And I think that's what we need to have, and that's what we need to be able to have, and we need to be able to have that without shouting people down. And I can already anticipate the shouting down I'm going to have of this and the ostracization I'm going to have, and it's probably going to make me even less inclined to write. But I have to say it. It's been playing in my head for years. And it's funny because people will say, oh, you shouldn't criticize an author like that, because how would you like it if people were talking about your books that way? And I'd like it, because it would mean that we're having a critical discussion about the way relationships work, should work, and do work, and don't work. I would enjoy it, because it would mean that my books were being talked about, and that's fantastic. It's one of the dreams that I've got. I don't care about money and riches and success and fame or any of that shit. I just want people to read my stories and enjoy my characters. And if that means having critical discussions about what the characters are doing, that's fantastic. I'm not my characters. I don't control my characters. I don't condone a lot of what my characters do. They're separate from me. And so I can criticize them. And even if you're criticizing my writing and what I have, the way it's structured or anything like that, there's very little that people could say that I haven't already said to myself. Maybe it would confirm some of the terrible things I've said, and it would make it run in my head for a little bit longer about all the shitty things that I've done or said or could have done better. But that doesn't necessarily mean that it shouldn't be brought up. I welcome criticism. I welcome constructive criticism. Obviously, if you're just going to come out and say, you know, you deserve to be killed because you wrote this book, that's stupid, and it's not helpful, and it's not part of the discourse that I'm talking about. But people should be able to say, I don't agree with this particular aspect of a character because of this particular reason, without being told to shut up. And that's especially so when you're talking about a romantic lead who is perpetrating child sex abuse. And it's not just the one book that happened to in our community either. It happened again recently with a gymnastics book, and people were doing the exact same thing. And again, I was just disgusted is the only word I can think of for it. again, not so much for the book, although I think the book is wrong and I don't believe that it should be romance. I don't think it should be in the category of romance at all. It should be in a psychological thriller, because the dude is a psychopath who'd groomed a gymnast under his control, under his care, and we have real world examples of that happening and the damage that it does on women. I don't see how anyone sees that happening in the real world and goes, yes, that's romantic. I need to write a story that features characters who do that. It just doesn't make sense in my head. And I guess that brings me along to the last thing that I've struggled with, how to get back into writing. Actually, it's not even the final thing, there's one thing after it, but second to final then, penultimate. I have struggled with diversity. As I said in one of my previous videos, I grew up in a very, very white community. There weren't a lot of people of colour in my school. There's never been a lot of people of colour in my life. There's never been a lot of LGBTQ plus people in my life. There's been some that I've known and that I've adored, absolutely, but not a lot. There's been a few people who I know who are have a disability or have issues with that sort of thing, but again, it's not in my day-to-day life. So when I started writing, I was writing from my day-to-day life, and my day-to-day life, the lighting just changed, fair enough. My day-to-day life is very much white, cis, het, and that's where I started writing. And then Angel came along and opened my eyes to my own bisexuality or pansexuality or whatever you want to call it, not straightness. And that sort of spurred some things in me. And then there was a few people that I wanted to make sure I cast in my books to have some diversity. So I tried to do some diversity in them, but it's becoming more and more desirable for myself to put more and more representation in the books. Problem with that is I don't want to do it wrong. I don't want to put someone in the books for the sake of putting someone in the books and misrepresent someone or have it be a terrible stereotype. That's not what I want to do. I don't want to harm anyone or perpetrate any of the issues that already exist in literature. You know, I don't want to do any of the tropes like the women in fridges or kill you gays tropes or anything like that, because they're terrible and there's a reason that they're bad representation. So I want to do representation right, but then you come into own voices, and I strongly, strongly believe in own voices. I would rather amplify the voices of people of colour, of people who are disabled, of people who are LGBTQ plus themselves, although I am, I guess, in that category, but I haven't lived that experience of any of the prejudice and hatred towards people in those communities. So I would rather amplify voices that fit that diversity than try and force my own stereotypes in. But then I recognize that it's important to have them in my books. And so I've kind of got a few cases where I've got characters that I really want to tell their story because they fit into the world so beautifully, and they have interesting, fascinating stories to tell, but I worry that I'm taking away own voices, or that I'm not representing, that I'm writing from a point of view that is not necessarily the correct one. And I know that there's ways around that with diversity readers and sensitivity readers and stuff like that. And that's definitely something I want to look into if I go any further with these. But that doesn't stop me from sort of second guessing myself on them. And I know that some people will watch this and think, oh, stop being such an SJW, stop being so woke, and stop caring so much. But like I said, I don't want to put harm out into the world. I don't want to hurt people. And I don't understand why you wouldn't try and just be caring towards other people. Why you wouldn't want to put accurate portrayals out into the media rather than terrible stereotypes. I just don't understand the logic of just fuck it and do it anyway, and it doesn't matter whether you hurt people. I just don't understand that mindset. And again, no real judgment to anyone who does have that, although there is a little bit if you're doing it deliberately and you know you're hurting people and you still just go, screw it, I'm going to do it. little bit of judgment there because you're an asshole, pure and simple. But it just sort of, I guess, plays in my head as I'm writing. So I'm writing one story that is a dual point of view, third person story told by the point of view of two different lesbians. They were lesbians that were in the first book in the series, and so they established their characters that I want to tell their story because I do think it's interesting. But again, I'm not a lesbian. I haven't had that lived experience of having to come out to a hateful family. And I don't want that to be the focus of the book because I know that there are too many books out there that focus on the negatives. So I'm trying to tell a balanced story where one of the families is not very supportive and one of the families is, but that even though that comes into the story, it's not the focus of the story. The focus of the story is the relationship between the two women and the love they share. And the same way that the focus on any of my other romance books would be about the relationship between the two leads. But again, there's that concern that I'm taking away own voices. But by the same token, own voices wouldn't apply with this book unless I ask someone completely different to write it. And what business do I have, who's sold very few books, who isn't a successful author, inviting someone who has their own ability to have their own platform that's probably likely to be bigger than mine to use their voice in my stories? Like, that doesn't make any sense either. And I know sensitivity readers and stuff like that, but I still think there's just a bit of a debate around that. And then the bigger example for me is a story that I've got within the Declan Reid universe, or the Reid family saga, I guess you could call it that, of a gentleman who is presented himself as a character that I want to tell the story of, who is a love interest for one of the children in the spin-off series. And he is confined to a wheelchair after an accident, a motorbike accident. And again, it's a story I really want to tell. It's a story that I really think is important, but it's a story that every time I try to write it, there's part of me that goes, is this really your story to tell? Is there a reason you should be writing this? Should you be amplifying own voices instead? And that's, I guess, a debate that I need to have with myself. In his story, he's confined to a wheelchair, and when we first meet him, he is depressed and he is suicidal. It's a bit of an antithesis to Me Before You. Not shitting on that book, but I know that a lot of people with disabilities have had issues with that, with the idea of never being happy because you're in a wheelchair. And I didn't want to represent that, but I understand that even representing him as depressed and suicidal kind of plays into that trope a little bit. But from me, where I was coming from with it, it has been started, it just hasn't really gone too much further. But for me, I was drawing on my own experience with chronic pain and the depth of just sheer blahness that I had in my life, where I was sitting there thinking, like, if I have to live one more day with this pain, I don't know what I'll do. And it made it really hard to do anything. And I was suicidal because of a few different things, but the pain was definitely part of it. So I was drawing on that. And when he overcomes that, it's not going to be because of the woman. Same as what I said about the Declan series. It's never because of the woman. It's because they discover something themselves because of meeting someone new. And it's just trying to find that balance between the two things, I think. And I'm probably overthinking it. I should probably just write it and not care and worry about it all later, but it doesn't stop it from playing in your mind. You know, you can tell yourself 100 times not to stress about something or not to worry about something, but all that does is bring it to the front of your mind and make you worry about it more. And the last item is just executive dysfunction at the moment. I'm putting all my effort into making sure I'm getting my work done. Obviously with COVID and life in general at the moment, it's very stressful. And so, you know, if you've ever done the spoons analogy, I've had a lot less spoons lately. So I've been using all the spoons I have for work, and then just have no energy left to even try and do any writing. And there's a heap of stuff that everyone says to me I should do to try and get the books out there better, and that small little things that I could do that would probably improve my sales and mean that people are actually buying and reading my books, which would be really, really great. But I can't even do them. Like, it's just I just don't have the energy, and every time I try and start a list or anything like that, my brain just turns off, and I don't know how to overcome that. There's certain things that I can do. I probably need to do some research on a whole video on executive dysfunction, and then just apply those principles that I research onto my own life and see how I go from there. But yeah, it's a thing. It's a whole thing. Everything's a whole thing at the moment. And I'm really hoping this video works, because again, I've spent over 40 minutes chatting about shit that is important and no one else will probably care about, but that's important to me. And I hope that it makes some sense, and I hope that you got something out of it, and I hope that you'll be back to watch some more videos, and I hope that you're having a great day, and I hope that I'll see you again soon. Bye.